How often does your podcast air? So other people can go more in depth with what the stuff that you're talking about.
So we do. We have several shows in our feed, and the IDP show, which is me, Adam, and Bobby, we record once a week. Once the season starts, that will probably be on Tuesdays. We'll record Tuesday nights, and it will drop Wednesday mornings. But we also have other shows in our feed. So we have shows popping in basically depending on the week, because it alternates. Not every show is weekly. But you're going to get at least one episode a week from the core three. And then we have an injury report that we drop on Saturdays to help you know, looking at the Friday injury reports, who should you be taking out of your lineup, who should you maybe consider benching if they're on the fence. But we have other shows.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you need to go listen to It's Not Ours.
Right?
About the in-depth side of it.
There's a great podcast that we're doing once a month with a couple of studs. One of them's from PFF. One of them's from IDP guys. They're going to be looking at the macro viewpoint. So a lot of times in our pod, week to week, we get a little in the weeds. We talk about what's happening, waivers, who should you be starting. They're looking at the big picture stuff, and that'll be once a month. And then Adam is doing a daily fantasy show every 2 weeks that's in the feed as well. So we've got you covered top to bottom. Whatever your fantasy football needs are, we've got you covered in the IDP show feed.
And what I wanted to really ask you, because I get asked this in person a lot simply because we created a podcast, is so many people are interested in starting one.
Yeah.
And they're always kind of curious what's behind it. I know because we're a video production company, like we have some access to resources that you guys don't have, but from the setup I've seen with you guys, I think it's very cost effective and it's got a really cool spot. So talk about that a little bit, like your all set up, because I think it's super cool.
Yeah, it's affectionately named the Sode Shack. It is essentially a shed in my backyard that was there when we bought the house. The neighbors like to joke that the husband built it for the son, but it was often the husband going out there and playing video games in the shed.
Hilarious.
Exactly.
But it's got nice laminate wood floors, faux brick walls. It's got a couple bunk beds. It's a nice air conditioned shed. We've got a heater out there now because we did some episodes in the winter and we're freezing our tails off. So we bought a little space heater for the wall. But it's we have a little table kind of like this in the middle. And we started out, man, we bought a $95 mixer off of eBay, and we bought like $50 Audio-Technica microphones, and we thought we were living large, and got to a point, that mixer, God love it, it lasted about a year. And
Did you bury it in the yard, like right by the shack?
Threw it in the dumpster. Because we started to hear a real high-pitched whine, and I was like, what is that? It was the mixer.
Yep.
So at that point, we upgraded to the Rodecaster Pro.
It's Jacksonville fans.
Yeah, truly. It's them. It's them. They're the whiny ones. So we upgraded to the Rodecaster Pro. We still had the microphones for a while, but just recently for Christmas, I asked for the Shure MV7 microphones. So we've got 2 of those. We also use the pod mic from Rode. So that's our setup. We're going on 2 years of doing this podcast, though. So what I always tell people when they want to start a show is invest in your sound, because
absolutely
it's such a crowded marketplace of pods now that if your pod doesn't sound good, people are going to tune out. They're done. If you're recording it on your phone, I know a lot of how to start a podcast blog articles will say, just do it however. No, invest in your sound. It is not that expensive.
Well, I think you also have to, yes, to everything you're saying, 100%. But I also think there's the mental side of making that decision that you're willing to invest in it. Because if you're not all bought in to whatever your vision is for the podcast, you're going to be wasting your time and your money. And so that's where I think, yes, all the sound equipment makes a lot of sense. But I think the first step, really, at least in my opinion, is you got to be sold on what your goal is, what your aim is.
Absolutely. It's kind of the gym bag before you actually step foot in the gym argument, right? Don't buy the equipment before you have a concept.
Right.
And you need a concept. You need something that differentiates. What is your brand? What is your podcast brand? Before we were IDP show, we were the Big 3 IDP podcast, the Big 3 being me, Adam, and Bobby. And our brand was very well established, and we were very intentional about establishing that from the very beginning. Like I said, yes, we're going to teach you about IDP. We're going to fill you in on the guys you should be drafting. But we're also going to have some fun. We're going to talk fast food. We're going to talk about Mountain Dew. We're going to make jokes. We're going to talk about roadkill.
We should do like a co-podcast host one day. Get like 12 people here just all talking about McDonald's.
I love it. Sign me up. So that is what our brand was that you could tune into these other shows. And this is why I think it's so important to know your niche, right? Like, we know the fantasy football podcast niche. Like, I can tell you all the major players in IDP and just regular fantasy. for the most part, these shows are as boring as watching paint dry.
Yes.
Now, they're informational. So if you want like to sit in on like a graduate level course on like, stacking your DFS lineup or taking a flex option that is going to outperform their ADP, sure, sign up for those guys. They're going to take care of you. But if you want to laugh and have fun and actually enjoy that hour to hour and a half, come over to the IDP show. That was our value proposition from the very beginning. And so,
I love it.
Yes, you have to be
great,
you
yeah.
have to be passionate and be very, very clear on what you want to do. And then once you make that decision to go all in on that, that's when you can start to upgrade. And do it small. Do it slow. Like that setup that we had, that was like $150, $200.
The fans will follow.
Yes, truly.
They will.
And I think there's two, it's like, anytime you start something new like that, like you're going to learn on the way. Like even us who have a very sound technical background and know a lot of people in the community, like we've even had some growing pains with how we approach this. And so, there's going to be that. But the beautiful thing that I think about podcasts is like it's always there for you to do.
That's right.
It's like you're not going to lose it.
Nope.
It's always there for you to do. And so it's not going to go anywhere.
The thing, it was funny when I was in my day job, I manage a content team of writers, and as part of the interview process, they would interview me like I was an author. I wanted to see how they could do on the phone with authors. And so as an author, I was writing a book about starting a fantasy football podcast. So I've actually talked about this way too much. So yes, know your niche so that then you can find a unique value proposition for your podcast that distinguishes you from the competition. But then also understand your audience, understand what they want. And you talk about learning on the fly, learning as you go. The biggest learnings for us have been what our listeners want. We can have an idea or a hypothesis about, hey, we think this will do well. But guess who gets to have the ultimate say?
Who's listening?
The listeners. Yeah. They will tell you what we learned. Very simple lesson, right? Title of the podcast, very important. You want to make sure that title is attention grabbing. You know what we saw? Anytime we put IDP or rankings in the title, the episode tended to do about 10 to 20% better.
Wow.
And guest episodes, you would think, okay, the three of us, we're a good core, but man, if we can tap into people from NFL.com and Football Guys and all these big well-known sites, people are going to, flock. Nope. The listens always did worse when it was a guest episode.
Wow.
No way.
They wanted to hear
really? Huh.
They wanted to hear the three of us. So things like that you can't know going in, and you can have the best intentions and really sound assumptions, but always be receptive to what your audience is telling you, and don't be afraid to adapt and pivot based off of that.
Pivot.
That's right.
Oh, I thought you said booba. You said pivot. I was like, what do you do?